My name is Carol, and I've got my tea. It's a very gray, very quiet afternoon here in Greenville. I want to tell you something that took me an embarrassingly long time to admit, especially for someone who spent 30 years as a teacher and a curriculum coordinator. We are supposed to be the ones with the answers. The year before I actually stepped away from work in 2021, I was absolutely bone-deep terrified. I wasn't just scared of being bored. I was scared that the life I had planned was going to crumble the second I didn't have a paycheck coming in. We had a plan, you see. Frank and I had spent decades looking at his spreadsheets. We talked about the day we'd both be home together. He went first, retiring in January of 2019. And then, 6 months later, Frank was gone. He had a cardiac event while mowing the lawn. Suddenly, the plan was just a piece of paper. I went back to my consulting job because I needed the noise. I needed somewhere to be. But I had this retirement date circled on the calendar for March of 2021. It was the date from Frank's original spreadsheet. I kept it because it felt like a promise. But as that date got closer, it felt less like a finish line and more like a cliff. I was staring at my teacher's pension and his Social Security survivor benefits. I was trying to figure out if $3,130 a month was actually going to be enough. Any financial planner would have looked at my paid-off mortgage and said I was out of my mind to worry. They probably would have been right. But nobody's being honest about what the transition actually feels like when you are doing it alone. You wake up on a random Tuesday and you realize the safety net of professional structure is about to be pulled away, and that feels weird. Not a good weird, not a vacation weird, just a heavy, quiet weird. You've been a professional for 40 years. Suddenly, you're looking at a future where nobody expects you at a 9 o'clock meeting. If you are doing it alone, like I am, that silence is incredibly loud. There is no one across the kitchen table to tell you it's going to be okay. You wonder if you're going to become invisible. You wonder if you'll have enough to fix the roof, or if you'll end up being a burden to your children. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system. I don't have a secret formula. I'm just going to tell you exactly what happened. I will tell you what I figured out during that final 12-month stretch. Frank would have had a very organized opinion about all of this. He loved a good process. I'm just the one left to tell the story. I want to be honest with you about the numbers and the feelings. Vague is not helpful. I remember sitting in my office at the nonprofit in late 2020. It was raining. I had a stack of curriculum reviews in front of me. They needed my signature. And for the first time in my entire career, I just stopped. I looked at the clock. I realized that in exactly 12 months, I wouldn't have this desk. My daughter Jen was already calling me from Charlotte 3 times a week. She is a marketing director, and she manages me like a project sometimes. She would say, "Mom, have you looked at the Medicare supplement plans yet?" Or she would ask, "Do you know exactly what the survivor benefit looks like on paper?" She meant well. She always does. Jen is a problem solver, just like her father was. But every time she asked, my chest got tight. I realized I was holding on to my job like a life raft. Not because I loved the work anymore. I was terrified of what was waiting for me at home. The house felt too big. The days felt too long. I went home that evening and I opened Frank's old file on the computer, the one he literally named The Plan. I hadn't looked at it since the week of the funeral. I just couldn't. But I looked that night. I looked at my pension, which is $1,240. I looked at the survivor benefit, which is $1,890. Together, that's $3,130. I sat there in the quiet of this house. This house we paid off in 2018 because Frank insisted on it. I felt this sudden, sharp realization. The math was fine, the numbers worked, but I wasn't ready. I was still trying to retire for the version of us that existed before October 2019. I had to start retiring for the version of me that exists now. So I want to go through 10 things I did during that final year, things that actually made a difference. The first thing I did was what I call a dry run of the new math. I did this for an entire year. I decided I would not touch a single penny of my consulting salary. I put it all in a separate account. I told myself I had to live exactly on that projected $3,130. I wanted to see if I could do it without suffocating. I bought a notebook, a small spiral-bound thing. I call it the book now. The cover is quite worn. I wrote down every single thing I spent, every electric bill, every tank of gas, every cup of tea. I remember going to the grocery store that first month. I was standing in the produce section. I saw a bag of those fancy Cara oranges. Frank used to love them. They were almost $7. I stood there for 3 whole minutes. I was completely paralyzed. I wondered if a widow on a fixed income should be buying $7 oranges. It sounds silly to say it out loud. My total monthly expenses are usually around $1,444. I have plenty of room in the budget. The mortgage is gone. Property taxes and insurance are about $310. Utilities run me $160. But my brain hadn't accepted that yet. I needed to prove it to myself. I bought the oranges. I wrote the $7 down in the book, and at the end of the month, I saw that I still had enough to put $800 into savings. I had over $880 left for spending money. I did that every single month for a year. That year of practicing the math gave me an incredible sense of peace. No financial advisor could have given me that. They can show you a chart, but you have to feel it. I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew I could survive on my own numbers. The second thing I did was much harder, and honestly, I put it off for months. I had to go through the garage. We had lived in this house for decades. The garage was essentially a museum of Frank's life. It was full of his tools, his engineering manuals, his projects. There were boxes of things we were going to fix when we both retired. The wood for a birdhouse, the parts for a lawnmower that hadn't run since 2015. It was incredibly heavy. I realized something important one afternoon. If I entered retirement with all that physical weight in my house, I would never feel free. I would just be the caretaker of a museum. I wouldn't be starting my own chapter. So I called Jen in Charlotte, and I called my son David in Portland. David flew in for a long weekend. Jen drove down. We spent an entire Saturday in that garage. It took 8 hours. It was dusty and it was hot. I cried twice. Not the dramatic kind of crying, just the quiet kind. I cried once when I found Frank's old Tilly hat, the one he wore when he mowed the lawn. And I cried again when David pulled out a box of drawings. Marco and Ella had made them for Frank years ago. Jen wanted to organize everything efficiently. She brought plastic bins and a label maker. David was different. He just wanted to sit on an overturned bucket and talk about his dad. He is much softer than Jen. He is more comfortable sitting in difficult feelings. I let them do both. We need different things when we are hurting. We cleared out 2/3 of that garage. I kept the basic tools. I kept the hammer, the screwdrivers, the wrench, the things I actually knew how to use. We gave the rest to a young couple down the street. They had just bought their first house. It felt right. It felt like clearing a path. I wasn't getting rid of Frank's memory. I was just making room for Carol's reality. The third thing I did was something I recommend to everyone. I did a complete audit of my own house. Frank was the civil engineer. He handled the mechanics of our lives. He knew where the water shutoff valve was hidden behind the drywall. He knew exactly when to bleed the radiators. About 6 months before I retired, I had a realization. I was essentially a guest in my own home. If a pipe burst, I wouldn't know what to do. I didn't know where the breaker was for the dryer. I felt very small admitting that to myself. I am a grown woman, but I didn't know. So I decided to fix it. I asked around at church and I hired a local handyman. His name was Robert. I paid Robert for 4 hours of his time. I didn't ask him to fix anything. I asked him to walk through my house and teach it to me. I had my notebook ready. We went into the basement. He showed me the main water valve. He made me physically turn it off and back on. He said, "You need the muscle memory, Carol." We went to the electrical panel. He explained every single switch. He showed me how to change the HVAC filter in the attic. He showed me how to check the gutter guards. I felt a little ridiculous at first. A 68-year-old woman taking notes on her own plumbing. But by the end of that afternoon, my shoulders dropped. I felt like the owner of the property. I wasn't just the person living in Frank's house anymore. It was my house. Frank would have found it incredibly amusing that I paid a man to show me things he had told me years ago. He would have rolled his eyes. But I think he would have been proud of the notebook. He respected a good note-taking system. Doing that audit took away a massive layer of background anxiety. I knew I could handle an emergency. The fourth thing I did was about my social life, and this is crucial. I realized that my entire social structure was tied to my job. I talked to my colleagues. I talked to the district administrators. I talked to parents. When I retired, all of that was going to vanish overnight. I didn't want to wake up to a void. My sister Patty lives in Indianapolis. Her husband died 8 years ago. Patty is my advanced scout. She has been through it all before me. We talk on the phone every Thursday. She gave me the best piece of advice. She said, "Carol, you need people who knew you before, but you also need people who only know you now." She was absolutely right. So I joined what I call the Tuesday Club. It is just a group of women from my church. They meet for breakfast every Tuesday morning. Many of them are widows. Some are divorced. Some are just retired. I started going while I was still working. I would use my vacation time, or I would take a long lunch if my schedule allowed. I wanted to establish the habit early. I have a tendency to want to lead things. Being a former coordinator, I want to organize the snacks. I want to set the agenda. But these women wouldn't let me. They just wanted me to sit down and drink my tea. They taught me how to just be Carol. They didn't need me to fix anything. They didn't need me to approve a curriculum. Having that breakfast on my calendar was a lifeline. When my last day of work finally came in March, I wasn't terrified. I woke up the next morning and it was a Tuesday. I got dressed and I went to breakfast. I knew exactly who was going to be sitting at that table. I wasn't drifting. I wasn't sitting alone in Frank's chair wondering what to do. The fifth thing I did was entirely about paperwork, and it was miserable. I sat down and figured out Medicare. Frank had always handled our health insurance choices. He loved comparing the premiums and the deductibles. He had spreadsheets for the spreadsheets. I turned 65 the year he died, so I was already in the system. But the supplemental plans confused me. The letters they send you in the mail are terrifying. They make it sound like if you choose the wrong plan, you will be ruined. I ignored it for months, but during that final year of work, I forced myself to sit down. I called the helpline. I spoke to a very patient woman named Brenda. I asked every stupid question I could think of. I found out my supplement was going to be $187 a month. I put it in the notebook. I made sure it fit into the $1,444 of monthly expenses. It did. Taking control of that one piece of paper felt like a victory. I wasn't hiding from the mail anymore. I wasn't letting the paperwork intimidate me. Frank was the planner. I was the talker. But I was learning how to be both. The sixth thing I did was the most personal, and it took the most courage. I opened the national parks list. Frank had built a massive spreadsheet. He had mapped out every park he wanted us to see in retirement. Yellowstone, Zion, Acadia. He had columns for the best hiking trails. He had notes on where to get coffee near the entrances. For over a year, I couldn't even look at the file icon on the computer desktop. It made me sick to my stomach. It felt like a list of broken promises. It was the physical proof of the future I had lost. But about 3 months before my retirement date, I clicked on it. I opened the file. I sat there and stared at his neat, organized columns, and I made a decision. I clicked on the header. It used to say, "Our retirement trips." I deleted that. I typed in, "Carol figures it out." I didn't delete a single one of his notes. I kept his trail recommendations. I kept his coffee shop names. I just added a new column for myself. I realized I didn't want to do a massive cross-country drive. Not alone. It felt too daunting. But I looked at the list and saw the Blue Ridge Mountains. That is only a few hours away. I could do that. I booked a small cabin for a weekend in April, right after my retirement date. I planned it entirely for myself. I think that was the real turning point of that final year. I stopped trying to execute his plan. I started making the plan mine. You have to stop being the we you were. You have to start being the I you are now. It doesn't mean you forget them. It doesn't mean you love them any less. It just means you are still here, and you have to live the life you actually have. The seventh thing I did might sound incredibly mundane, but it shifted my mindset completely. I changed my wardrobe. I know that sounds trivial, but for 30 years I dressed like a teacher. I had sensible slacks. I had structured cardigans. I had shoes meant for standing on tile floors all day. About 2 months before I left the office, I started boxing up the work clothes. I kept a few nice things for church, but I packed away the strict professional uniform. I bought softer things. I bought dusty rose sweaters. I bought soft blue blouses. I made a conscious choice to never wear black on camera or around the house. I stopped buying coffee entirely. I switched completely to tea. The smell of coffee was too associated with Frank's morning routine. It made the kitchen feel entirely too empty. Tea was mine. The soft, sage-green sweaters were mine. I was physically shedding the identity of the coordinator. I was putting on the clothes of a retired woman. When you look in the mirror and see someone comfortable, it changes your posture. You stop bracing for an impact. The 8th thing I tackled was my relationship with Jen and David regarding my grief. This was a hard conversation. Jen is efficient. When Frank died, she handled the funeral, the food, the phone calls. David is quieter. He calls me every Sunday without fail. That was Frank's habit, and David just passed it down without discussion. I love them both fiercely. But during that year, Jen's check-ins were making me anxious. She treated my retirement like a crisis to be managed. I finally had to sit her down in my living room. I told her the truth. I said, "Jen, I appreciate you, but I need you to stop managing me." I showed her my notebook. I showed her the dry run of the budget. I showed her the notes from Robert the handyman. I said, "I am figuring this out. I need you to just be my daughter." She cried a little. I think she was just scared for me. But after that, the phone calls changed. She started telling me about her marketing job instead of asking about my Medicare. David was different. I told him I was retiring on his dad's timeline. He just said, "Dad would be glad you kept the date." He always knows what to say. Setting those boundaries before I actually retired was crucial. It meant I entered retirement with my children as my family, not my supervisors. It allowed me to be their mother again. The 9th thing I did was I forced myself to cook. Frank loved to cook dinner when I got home from work. He made an incredible chili. He had a specific way he chopped the onions. For the first year after he died, I ate toast. I ate cereal. I couldn't bear to stand at the stove alone. But as retirement approached, I knew that couldn't last. I couldn't spend 20 years eating toast. I had to reclaim the kitchen. I started with his chili recipe. The first time I made it, I burned the bottom of the pot. I threw the whole thing away and sat at the table and cried. But a week later, I tried again. It wasn't quite right. It still isn't right, honestly. I don't know what his secret was. But the act of chopping the onions, of stirring the pot, it helped. It forced me to occupy the space, to be alive in my own home. By the time my last day of work rolled around, I was cooking for myself 3 nights a week. It wasn't perfect, but it was a routine. And routine is what saves you when the structure vanishes. The 10th, and maybe the most important thing I did, was I forgave myself. I forgave myself for being scared. I spent so many months feeling guilty that I wasn't grateful enough. I had a paid-off house. I had a pension. I had 4 healthy grandchildren. I should have been thrilled to retire, but I was just sad and frightened. I finally realized that both things can be true. You can be financially secure and completely heartbroken. You can be ready to leave your job and terrified of what comes next. That is just the reality of doing this alone. I stopped trying to force myself to feel joyful. I just let myself feel whatever Tuesday brought. I don't fully understand why some days the quiet is comforting and other days it is suffocating. I really don't. But doing all this preparation in that final year made a difference. It gave me a foundation. I'm 2 years into this now. It has been 2 years since I packed up my desk. I'm not going to tell you it all worked out perfectly. It didn't. Some months are tighter than others. Sometimes the car needs tires and it makes me nervous. Some days I wander around this house and wonder what I'm doing. But mostly it's okay. It is more okay than I ever expected it to be. I have built a life that works. It is not the life I planned with Frank, but it is a good life. I have made a kind of peace with the quiet. I have my tea. I have Patty on the phone on Thursdays. I have the Tuesday Club. I have my grandchildren, Ella and Marco, and Sam and Nora. I am building what's mine now. It just took me a long time to understand that was allowed. I think a lot of people are sitting where I was in 2020. They are looking at a date on a calendar and feeling sick. They are doing the new math and wondering if it's enough. If that is you, I want you to know it is entirely normal. You are not doing it wrong. It is just hard. But you can figure it out. You do the dry run. You clean the garage. You ask the handyman where the water valve is. You take it one small, practical step at a time, and eventually you look around and you are standing on solid ground. If any of this sounds like your situation, leave a comment below. I read them all. Tell me how you are handling the transition. Specifically, what is the one practical thing you did to prepare yourself? Did you do a house audit like I did? Did you practice living on the new numbers? I find your comments more useful than you'd think. We learn from each other here. And if you want more of this, stick around. We will keep talking about the real numbers and the hard days. That's what we do here. All right. Okay. I think that's what I wanted to say. Thanks for being here.